Hello, my name is Doug Gardner, and I'm a faculty member in the Student Leadership and Success Studies Department. And for my summer university TED Talk, I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas about how to talk to students about careers. And these might be students that you work with here at UVU, or they might be students that are your own students, that are living at home, getting ready to go to college, or in college and trying to figure out what they want to do. Frequently, as I tell people about what I do in teaching a major in career exploration class, I hear parents say, "I wish I would have taken that class." And they encourage their own children to take classes like SLSS 2100. You know, what we offer today, and what I offer in this class or offer today or for people who take this class, is a way to sort through and figure out what they want to do. You know, and they might not figure out what they want to do by the time they leave the class, but at least they know what they need to do to figure out how to make a decision about their career. And one of the things that I think is kind of nice too is that, you know, when we're talking about career decision making, but this is any kind of decision making. And so let's start off talking about undecided students. So students who are undecided in their major and their career decision making, there's several different responses, and a lot of times they want to just put a bag over their head, like the guy in the bottom right-hand corner. Just, you know, don't talk to me about my career. You know, I don't know what I want to do. A lot of times they might wear it on their shirt saying, "I'm still undecided," because they have so many people asking them questions. You know, what are you going to do with your life? You know, what are you going to major in? What are you going to do for the rest of the next 40 years? And they don't know. And so they want to just communicate to everybody, say, "Leave me alone." Sometimes they get stuck between on and off and just want to stay right there in the middle and not commit to one way or the other. Now, like the guy on the left with the bucket on his head sitting on the fence, that's unfortunately what a lot of us want to do. A lot of undecided students want to do is they just want to sit on the fence and say, "Hey, you know, leave me alone. I'm not going to go here or there. I can't figure it out." But with some help, they can figure it out. And that's what we're going to talk about. Oh, before we leave this slide, the guy in the top left-hand corner, he might get slapped here in just a second. Sometimes unfortunate circumstances happen when we vacillate in the middle and don't decide. Well, let's start off with some theory. Okay, so Gamson and Chickering, they talked about 7 vectors or 7 things that college students need to be able to do while they're in college. You know, we're looking at this list here: developing competence, managing emotions, moving through autonomy toward interdependence. You know, you can read the rest of the list. Very key in this, connected to career decision making, is establishing an identity. You know, identifying who I am, and you know, there's several different ways, you know, that we establish who we are in an identity. But what we're talking about today is we're talking about a career or work identity. Occupational identity, if you'd like to call it that. And so, you know, this idea of establishing identity is not a new concept. Erickson has been talking about it for a long time, and in his psychosocial crises that he addressed, you know, this is a very old model. You know, he talked about identity versus role confusion, and that if we, you know, what's at stake here? You know, that if we don't establish an identity in our careers, then we, you know, go on. Or we don't go on to the next stage, but we have this role confusion where we don't know who we are. Now, and this is the area that we're going to take a little bit more closer look at in the next ideas. But first, I want to just mention that, you know, 13 to 21, you know, it's not common and it's not unnatural if a person doesn't know what their identity is by the time they're 21. And so, you know, this model, you know, of needing to figure out your role confusion that Erickson proposed, you know, the stages, you know, intimacy, you know, going on to intimacy versus isolation is important, but, you know, there's more time in, you know, besides waiting until you're, you know, or having to figure it out by the time you're 21. And so there's a new ideas of research talking about emerging adulthood that I think is important to pay attention to as well, and that is a longer period of time. Well, what we're going to take a look at now is the work of James Marcia. Marcia, I think is the way that his name is said. He took this idea of identity and he sliced and diced it a couple different directions. So first of all, he says, okay, when you're going through this identity formation process, you know, there's these different stages that you might be in, and you know, part of it is not experiencing a crisis, and then an important part of it is experiencing a crisis. Okay? On the other side, if we slice it the other way, is commitment. Not making a commitment versus making a commitment. And so this leaves us 4 different areas that we're going to talk about for a minute. So the first one is diffusion. And this is giving up. Now, these are people that attempt maybe to go out and figure out what they want to do in the world, but they find it too overwhelming. And so they go home and they stay in the parents' basement and they stay there and they don't leave. And this is not something that we want to have happen. Students that come into my class, they're not in diffusion because they're not giving up. They're trying to figure things out. Unless, occasionally we have students that come in because their moms or dads drag them into the class and said, you need to figure things out. But they're not there willingly. And so diffusion is giving up. And you see it most prevalently as you see people that just don't come out of the basement and don't stop playing video games. On the other hand, you have people that go into foreclosure. Foreclosure is conforming to the expectations of others. And this is a student that has a parent who says, I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't get a chance to, so I think you ought to be a lawyer. And the kid says, okay, I'll be a lawyer. Without really thinking about whether they would be a good lawyer or not. This is just conforming to the expectations of others without allowing themselves to have a crisis. And that's what we're going to get into next, is this area of moratorium. Moratorium, what's the difference between moratorium and diffusion and foreclosure is that they're not making a commitment yet. They don't know what they want to do, but they're in a state of moving forward anyway. And that's what we do in the SLSS 2100 course, Major in Career Exploration, is we bring students in and we say, okay, you're in a moratorium time period, and that is a good place to be. You have to be in moratorium before you can actually get to the other side of this and to actually make a decision, which is achievement. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk more about moratorium. So let's bring this up a little bit and pry under the hood a little bit more of moratorium. And first we start with the definition. So a moratorium is a period of delay, a waiting period, suspension of activity. In this case, when we're talking about career decision making, we're talking about delaying making a decision about your career. It's a great place to be, but it's also uncomfortable. And that's where, professors in all of the students' classes, a class that's specifically focused on major and career exploration, where parents, where friends can really be helpful in helping students to realize that, you know what? You don't know what you want to do the rest of your life? That's okay. And then helping them to be able to talk about that. And so that's what we're going to get into. The first thing I want to mention is that a crisis is good. A crisis is having an exploration experience. The student who, the parents came to him and said, I always wanted to be a lawyer and you should be a lawyer because I couldn't do that. So maybe I could fulfill my dreams through you. And, maybe being a lawyer is the right thing for them to do. But they need to have a crisis first, which means that they need to take some time to explore. They need to ask some questions about, would I be a good lawyer? What do lawyers do? What would be required of me? What does it take to become a lawyer? And those are some important questions that need to be asked and answered during this time period that we call moratorium. So, what can we do during moratorium that would help us or help anybody move forward in making decisions about their careers? And that's where we introduce the idea of planned happenstance. This is an idea originally introduced by a guy by the name of John Crumboldt, who just passed away a couple years ago. And he identified 5 skills of the planned happenstance decision maker: curiosity, persistence, flexibility, optimism, and risk-taking. So you ask, what do we do in this moratorium time period when we don't know? You don't just sit there and do nothing. You move forward, as was introduced to you in just a minute ago. You move forward with curiosity, persisting even though you can't figure everything out right away, and you run into obstacles. And running into obstacles is very common in any decision-making endeavor, particularly with career decision-making. You have to be flexible. You have to allow yourself to be influenced by the things that you discover along the way. You need to stay optimistic and that you will ultimately figure this out. And you need to be willing to take risks. Well, a lot of times the expectation is that, I start college and I start here and I end up, at one point. And that's what the expectation is. But the reality is that career decision making is actually a windy path. And planned happenstance describes that. And what I'd like to do also is I'd like to share with you some stories. We all love stories. And so I'm going to share with you some stories of planned happenstance, of the real way that career decisions are made. So this is a story that took place in a kid that was a college student on the East Coast. I think it was in North Carolina. And he was getting ready to graduate. He was in his last semester of college. He had studied finance, and he wasn't really excited about anything that he could do with his career and with making decisions. And so, what did he do? It was a spring day. Weather was nice outside. So he decided, in the middle of his stress, he decided to skip class and go surfing. So he went out surfing, and while he was out surfing and just kind of, trying to decompress a little bit and get away from his anxiety that he was starting to feel, he was out there catching waves, and all of a sudden he met this other guy that was out there catching some waves too in the middle of the day. And they got talking, and the guy that he met said, so hey, what do you do? I'm a college student. What are you majoring in? Finance. And the guy said, oh, I'm in finance. And they started talking about what they do and what they wanted to do. And you know what? By the end of the day, that kid had a job. Not just an internship, but he had a full-time job from somebody that had a job to offer to him. And it was because he skipped class and went surfing. Sometimes that's what has to happen, is that sometimes you need to do things like that. Again, that's the windy path to career decision making. Another story I'd like to share with you. John Crumboltz. I just introduced his name just a minute ago. When he was a student, or before he became a student actually, he was walking along and he heard some people around the corner that were having a good time, and he wondered what they were doing. What are those people doing around the corner that are having such a good time together? And so he stuck his head around the corner and he looked to see what they were doing. And they were playing tennis. And he says, that looks like fun. I've never played tennis before. I think I'm going to start playing. So he started playing tennis. And then one day he was playing tennis, and as he was playing tennis, he met some people, and they said, what are you doing with your major in your career? He says, well, I'm just getting ready to go to college. What are you going to study? I don't know. And the guy said, well, I study psychology. John was able to ask him some questions about psychology, and John ultimately went into the field of psychology and became a professor at Stanford University and published on a very well-known theory about planned happenstance and about how decisions are made in careers. So there's lots of other stories. And if you look and if you ask questions, you'll find out that people make decisions based on the experiences that they have. And something I want to share with you, doing and helping others do planned happenstance. There's some principles of planned happenstance. I'm not going to go over these, but you can stop the video and look at these. Here's some principles about how to do planned happenstance. Here's some questions that you could ask people to help them to develop their curiosity, how to help them to accept chance events in their lives, and how to help them overcome obstacles. Now, the Major in Career Exploration course here at Utah Valley University is based on this model right here, gaining a knowledge of self and gaining a knowledge of career options. Knowledge of self right there on the left, those are things that you get to know, particularly skills. Over here, how do what you know about yourself integrate with what you know about career options? Now, what I want to share with you is that when students need the opportunity to dip their toe in the water without having to make a decision. And here's some things that they could do. They could get a part-time job. They can do a workplace observation, a job shadow, an informational interview, a life design conversation, or an internship. These are all things that are set up, and we help them do that. UVU has an internship office to be able to dip their toe in the water without having to make a commitment, so that they can go back to this integration process of discovering more knowledge about themselves and more about career options, and maybe testing possibilities again before they make a decision. Now we're back to where we started, and this is making a decision about our careers. I have one more piece of advice to give to you as you're talking to people. Students who are undecided feel uncomfortable. They don't have everything figured out. The worst thing that we can make them do is make them feel shamed for not knowing what they do. So, when they go into those settings, we need to teach them that, when somebody asks them, a well-meaning uncle asks them and says, what are you going to do with your life? Instead of having to hang their head in doubt and shame and say, I have no idea. And instead of expecting them to have all the answers figured out, first I'm going to do this, I'm going to, get my bachelor's degree in this, and then I'm going to have a child, and then I'm going to get a master's degree in this, I'm going to start a humanitarian organization, I'm going to have twins, one's a boy and one's a girl. You get my point. They don't have to have everything figured out. So we don't want them to have to feel like they have to do this. We want to help students to get to the point where they can say, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm in the process of trying to figure that out. And then say, Uncle Bob, what do you do? How did you decide about what you wanted to do? Thank you. My name is Doug Gardner. If you wanted to send me an email and letting me know what you learned from this experience, from this presentation, I will send you the slides. Have a great day.